I'll turn it over to you, Lori.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and welcome everyone. My name is Lori Bavacco. I'm an oncology dietitian, and I'm actually presenting today from home, which is not like me. I've been back at the center and utilizing our demo kitchen. I just did a program yesterday, and some of the slides that I'm going to use to present today, I borrowed from yesterday's program. But if you look on our YouTube channel, you can see that recording is already up, and it's all about blood sugar control. And I thought it was a pretty informative program. We did it as a lunch and learn. So I presented a PowerPoint, and then I went into the demo kitchen and I demonstrated a handful of recipes. So if you'd like more information about that, all you got to do is ask. I'm always happy to share. So there were a few questions submitted today that, as usual, I put together on a PowerPoint presentation. So what I'm going to do is share my screen, and I will see you after we wrap with this. Okay, so here's our April 30th edition of Ask the Dietitian. Oops. So the questions that were submitted, the first one was, I've cut out sugar out of my diet 3 years ago. That's a long time ago. And sometimes cook with maple syrup or honey. Is one a better choice in terms of not encouraging growth of cancer cells? The second question is, what is your opinion of probiotics and kombucha? The third is, what is the downside of eating plant-based meat substitutes? And last but not least, how do I get a private session with Lori? So the first question is, I'm going to read it again. I've cut out sugar out of my diet. What if I use maple syrup or honey? Is this a better choice, specifically so that I don't encourage the growth of cancer cells? I love this question. I listed this one first because I'm going to spend the most time on it. I answer this question, I would say, every single day, not only at Cancer Wellness Center, but also in the medical oncology clinics that I work. It's a very concerning question that a lot of people ask me. So I want to help kind of just set the record straight. So let's first focus then on sugar and cancer. What is the relationship between the two? And I put this image up there because I think at this current time, we're like afraid of it, right? It's like a toxin. We get addicted to it. It's dangerous for us. It's going to cause cancer or make our cancer worse. Not so fast. There's a lot more to the story. So here's what we know about sugar and cancer. The thought is, or the question that people ask me, that if cancer cells thrive on sugar, then I should cut it out, right? Because if I cut it out of my diet, it's going to help to stop those cancer cells from growing. That's not exactly how it works. So all of our cells, whether they are normal non-cancerous cells or a cancer cell, they all need sugar, which we call glucose, and that's found in all carbohydrate-containing foods. They all use it, and there's really no way to feed our healthy cells and not feed our cancer cells. Added sugars are a little bit of a different story, and I'm going to talk about them in just a moment. Now, when we cut sugar out of our diet, all forms of it from all sources of carbohydrates, what happens is our bodies may turn to other sources for fuel, right? Because our bodies need to survive somehow. And cancer cells certainly are a demonstration of that. They're so able to break the rules because they're so determined to survive. So if we cut sugar out of the diet, cut out all carbohydrates, and what happens is our body will use other sources for fuel, right? So this can lead to the breakdown of protein stores, which come directly from muscle. And that could lead to muscle loss and then even possibly malnutrition. So this is potentially very dangerous for someone who is already potentially compromised as a result of treatment. If we restrict carbohydrates, so what comes to mind are fruit and whole grains. If we limit those, it can result in eliminating the super healthy foods that are vital for cancer protection because they offer us good sources of fiber, as well as vitamins and minerals, and super important phytonutrients that protect our immune system. And even more concerning is that cancer cells have demonstrated metabolic flexibility. So what that means is that they basically will use any source that they can get their hands on for fuel. So let's say we try to outsmart those cancer cells and say, I'm going to take sugar away from you. They adapt, they conquer, and they say, okay, well, then I'll just use something else. At this current state, we have no randomized controlled trials that show that sugar causes cancer or leads to the progression of cancer. So this is taken from a recently published article, and I know it's a very busy slide, but it's really a review of all the research that has been done on the ketogenic diet. So the ketogenic diet is basically like the lowest sugar diet possible. You cut out everything. You cut out fruit, you cut out yogurt, all those great whole grains, and you try to get your body into a ketogenic state. So what I want to point out is that the second pie chart here, what they've found is that, okay, in maybe 60% of the time for some tumor types, and it's going to probably be mostly brain tumors, it might have this cancer protective quality, but in the remaining 40% of the time, it might not be so protective. We found it didn't matter for some cancer types, that it was actually pro-tumor. So it advanced the cancer process in some tumor types. It caused some severe side effects. And then in others, there was really no clear effect, or there was no data from the research. So it's mixed, right? We're not 100% sold that this is necessarily the way to go in terms of cancer protection. And we don't have any major studies right now. So it's too soon to tell, and it potentially could be dangerous. So we don't advise a ketogenic diet for just anybody. Okay, so if that's something you're considering, please discuss it with your medical team. So let's go back to sugar and cancer. Now, too much added sugar in an unhealthy diet can lead to weight gain. And if we have too much weight, this can in turn increase the risk for 12 different types of cancer and impact the prognosis of a diagnosis of cancer. Those 12 types are listed here: colorectal, pancreatic, ovarian, esophageal, liver, gallbladder, postmenopausal breast, stomach, kidney, ovarian, prostate cancers. So this added sugar contributes a lot of calories without a lot of nutrients and has been shown to independently cause weight gain. So added sugars, let's focus on them for a moment. They are defined as sugars that are added during the processing of foods. They weren't there in the first place. So foods packaged as sweeteners, sugars from both syrups and honey, and sugars from concentrated fruit or vegetable juices. Those are all considered added sugars, all considered high in calorie but low in nutrition, and all associated with increased risk for chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, liver and kidney disease, also Alzheimer's disease. It contributes to inflammation as well as aging. So we find that people that have a high amount of added sugar in the diet also have more wrinkles. So if any of those reasons are a concern for you, please consider how to reduce added sugars. And I'm going to help show you how to do that. So there are over 50 different names on food packages for added sugars, and you'll find them listed in the ingredients. So here is just some of them. I don't know if this is all, there's 57 at this point. There's a lot, right? So, and they get kind of clever, these food manufacturers, with finding ways to add sugars that sound maybe a little healthy, right? So, you know, to go back to this question, you'll see that maple syrup and honey are on this slide. They are considered added sugars. Okay. Some of them sound a little healthy too, like molasses. I think like sorghum syrup kind of sounds healthy. You know, like if I saw that, I would think, oh, maybe this is a good option. All considered added sugar, all recommended to be limited in a healthy diet. So what are the recommendations to have that we have at the moment for added sugars? The dietary guidelines for Americans suggest that 10% of the calories we eat come from added sugars, no more. If we can get even lower than 10%, that's probably better, because internationally, they suggest about 6% of total calories from added sugars. And there is some pushback about this 10% from the Dietary Guidelines of Americans. We think it should be lower. So what does that shake out to be? In a day, it's about 7.5 to 9 teaspoons of added sugar for men, 5 to 6 teaspoons per day for women. Okay, so if you took out a measuring spoon, a teaspoon, and you measured out honey or maple syrup, then you can start to see how much you might be having based on your cooking and your recipes to see, is it within these guidelines? Now, there's a lot of concern. I have a lot of work to do as a dietitian because most Americans are eating the equivalent of 22 teaspoons of added sugar per day. 22, it's like astounding. So that's the equivalent of 110 pounds of added sugar every year. So you can see why we sort of have this nutrition crisis in this country. We're eating high calorie, nutrient poor foods, and it's really contributing and exacerbating a lot of our diseases. So here's an example of how quickly the added sugars can add up. And I'm picking on a product here. So this happens to be a protein shake. And if we look at the label in the middle, it has 37 grams of added sugar. So 37 grams of added sugar is the equivalent of 9 teaspoons. All right, and the way that we use that math there, what you see is 4 grams of added sugar is the equivalent of 1 teaspoon. So very quickly, these added sugars add up. Now, here's the good news. We have a food label that gives us this information now. So we just have to do our homework. You know, if we're having products like this one, maybe we want to substitute it with an alternative to start to reduce those sugars in our diet. The 70% of the added sugars that we eat in the standard American diet come from sugar sweetened beverages. So that protein shake, that would be included as an example of a sugar sweetened beverage. But there's also energy drinks and sweet teas or sports drinks, which I know a lot of individuals use. They have a considerable amount of added sugar. Next are frozen desserts like ice cream, but even alternatives, like if you do an oat-based ice cream, let's call it that, you'll find a good amount of added sugars in them. Our sweet dairy like yogurt, and then lastly, nutrition bars or granola bars or some of those meal replacement or protein bars, a considerable amount of added sugar. So let's go back to that question about maple syrup or honey. So now you know that we don't necessarily need to worry about cancer growth, that added sugars are not contributing to the development of cancer or the progression of cancer. It's much more complicated than that. But added sugars aren't really the best choice for us in terms of nutrition, right? They add a lot of calories. So maple syrup and honey are considered added. They are added sugars, and any promotion or advertising or marketing that you might see related to maple syrup and honey is really insignificant, okay? They're contributing more sugar than really any vitamins or minerals or any health properties. They add a lot of calories with a really negligible amount of those nutrients. Now, personally, I happen to love maple syrup, and it's something that I use when I'm looking to make desserts or to sweeten something. So how do I use it? Well, I help make it fit, right? And that's the key. So with added sugars, they can fit into a healthy diet, especially maple syrup, especially honey, as long as it's within your budget, right? So now you have some guidance about that, 5 to 6 teaspoons. If I'm using a tablespoon in my cooking, you know, how does that shake out per serving of that total amount? And then what else are you having in a day, right? So that's how you can really make sure you're within budget. So here's the bottom line. I want you to do a self-assessment. How many added sugars are in your diet right now? Start to look at labels, start to think about, you know, what it is that you're eating day to day. And then you could see if it really kind of fits, right? That maple syrup or that honey, because there's room for it. That's why the guidelines are what they are. There's room for it. It's not going to make or break you. It's not going to make cancer worse or make it recur. There's room for it as long as the total diet is being considered. And on that note, I would say evaluate your overall diet. So how healthy is your diet? In this presentation, we're going to share with those who registered. I have here a link that allows you to assess the quality of your diet. So then you could see, all right, how well am I doing? And maybe I need to work on some other things before I start worrying about maple syrup. And I think that's really important to consider. Okay, the second question, my opinion on probiotics and kombucha. I like this question. All right, so let's start first with probiotics. We define them as this way. Probiotics are live microorganisms that, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit on the host. You see in bold, italics, and underline 3 very important concepts. They have to be alive, they have to be the right amount, and they have to translate to a health benefit. So that's what helps us decide if a probiotic is worth taking or not. Right, so those are the essential conditions. Not all probiotics are created equal. Not all foods with probiotics in them are created equal. If we're looking to benefit some sort of concern that we might have, we need these 3 things. We need those probiotics to be alive in the right amount and really benefit us. So what we do see about probiotics are that research supports that they reduce antibiotic-associated diarrhea. They treat an infectious type of diarrhea called C. diff. It improves mild to moderate irritable bowel syndrome and other digestive symptoms. It can help manage symptoms associated with poor digestion of lactose, which is very common. And it can decrease some common infections like respiratory, gut, or vaginal tract infections. But here's the thing. We got to find the right probiotic to do those things, right? And that's where I come in handy. So we look at the group, the genus, the species, and the strain. That strain is really what matters. That's what offers the specific benefit, right? So if someone has an infectious diarrhea, we're going to find a very specific strain to treat that. If someone has irritable bowel syndrome and tends to be constipated with it, we find a very specific strain for that. Another individual might have irritable bowel syndrome with diarrhea. We find a very specific strain for that. So it really all depends on what you're looking to treat or manage. And this is kind of a review of that. When you're choosing a probiotic, you got to remember that all strains are different. Pick one that will benefit what you need and want. The amount matters, so the dose certainly needs to be taken into consideration. And not all probiotics are going to necessarily work because there's a lot of other factors that play into the equation. So for example, the foods that we eat actually might influence if a probiotic is going to be beneficial. What we have already living in our digestive tract might influence its efficacy. And then just our unique makeup, our physiology, that may also influence probiotic function and efficacy. So let's move on to kombucha. So kombucha is a tea that's a fermented beverage. They use a SCOBY, or a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, and then they add tea and sugar to that. Now, fermented foods have been around for a long time. We're going way back, like thousands and thousands of years, and our ancestors have enjoyed them for quite some time. Although food might be made with these microorganisms, it doesn't mean the final product is actually going to deliver them to us. Any food that's been fermented may lose bacteria and or yeast if it has been filtered, heated, or canned. So there's a lot of misconceptions about fermented foods. So for example, something like sourdough bread, it is fermented, but as soon as we cook it, then we destroy the microbes. We destroy those microorganisms. So initially it has the beneficial bacteria, but then it's lost during the cooking process. Now, kombucha itself may contain up to 1 million to 1 billion microbes in every gram. That's a whopping dose. So kombucha does retain those live active cultures. It's not, we want to look at the whole package though, right? So it's not without some other components. We do want to consider the amount of caffeine that's in it if you're sensitive. That's not a lot. That's a lot less than coffee and most teas. And there are some calories in them, and different products will add different amounts of sugar. So if a product in a serving has 8 grams of sugar, remember that 4 grams is a teaspoon. So that would mean 2 teaspoons of added sugar. So we just want to read labels carefully. Now, the theoretical benefits of kombucha is that it may improve digestion, lower inflammation, as well as provide antioxidants. However, we don't really have a lot of data at this point in time to support these claims. So if you read or see something or hear something, it might be a little exaggerated because we don't have any evidence at this point. There are links here to what I wanted to share with you that I use regularly, and they come from an international scientific advisory on prebiotics and probiotics. There's a great resource there that gives you the different names, like it names names for probiotics and how well it treats certain conditions. So if you follow those links, it'll bring you to that content. But again, as a dietitian, that's where I can be helpful. So here's the bottom line on probiotics and kombucha. If you're thinking about using probiotics specifically, just discuss this with your medical team because they can be contraindicated for someone who has a weakened immune system. What happens is if someone's immune system is compromised, it might not recognize that bacteria as being beneficial. It might recognize it as being harmful. Consider why you would want to use them and if there is any specific indication for it, right? So is there a product that has shown that the live amount, the dose will help that condition? As with kombucha, I think it's a great product, a fermented product, and consider it. You know, I think if it's in a healthy diet, again, it could add beneficial microorganisms, but you know, choose the product that's best for you and keep in mind it's not going to just cure everything, right? We want to think about all of the things that we're doing within our diet. Okay, next question. What is the downside of eating plant-based meat substitutes? What a good question. All right, so gosh, the market's like flooded, right? They're everywhere. So I wanted to include this slide as a comparison, especially with some of our takeout options or you see fast food here, because that's where I see a lot of the products as well is on the menus, right? So the original version is in the purple ink. So it's either the beef or the pork version. And then we're going to compare it to some of those very popular and trendy alternative options. Now, if you ask me, the nutrition content is not very different. Okay, so for saturated fat, they're very close. Or some of the plant-based alternatives are higher for saturated fat, and it's coming from coconut oil, which isn't really the best choice for us for oils. And same goes for sodium. So most of these products are actually higher in sodium than the original form, right? Than if you were to just have a cheeseburger. It's pretty impressive. Okay, so I just want you to be aware of that. So sometimes when we make substitutions, we have to think about the whole package. Another concern is that this ingredient called soy leg hemoglobin. What is that? All right, so soy leg hemoglobin is artificial, it's manufactured, and it's added to some of our plant-based alternatives, and it's made from genetically engineered yeast. It's meant to replicate heme in red meat and make it taste more like meat. That's why sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, it tastes great, it tastes just like a burger. It's probably because of the soy leg hemoglobin. Now, the problem is we don't know if it's safe. It's a new ingredient and it's generally recognized as safe at this point in time. There's some agencies that are pushing the FDA to review its safety and to start to look at researching, is this having any potential detrimental implications for our health? So that's sort of a concern, I think, you know, just because we're trying to come up with an alternative with an ingredient that is questionable at this point in time. So why then? Why would we choose it and how to choose the right ones? Well, we know that these plant-based alternatives are great for the planet. We know that it can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is a pretty significant concern. What I would say, if you're looking at products, here's like a good checklist. For 3 ounces, try to get 10 grams of protein. Check that salt content. Remember what I showed you in that table. Aim for healthy fats. So if you read ingredients, if the fats in the product come from avocado or sunflower oil, this is much more preferred over coconut or palm oils. Here are, and you're going to get a list from me after today too. Here's a list from Nutrition Action, which I happen to love as a resource they kind of went through all the different options that are available, and they ranked them, they kind of qualified the sodium, the saturated fat that's in them, and the protein. And so it gives us some guidance about, okay, if we're going to go this route, here are some options to consider. So my bottom line is that, sure, they are a healthy inclusion as part of a healthy diet, especially the ones that I just listed on the last slide. Use that checklist, right? Because we don't want to bombard our diet with a lot of extra salt or saturated fats if we can help it. And I would say, as a dietitian, I almost always challenge everyone, think about what else could be beneficial for your diet without relying on a product, right? Could you use whole food plant-based proteins? You sure can. And that would be from beans, lentils, and whole soy foods. And could you incorporate different recipes using them to still get the benefit of a meat alternative, but without all those additives? So here listed are some recipes from an organization called the Pulse Organization for lots of beans and lentil recipes. And then also cancer fighting recipes from the American Institute for Cancer Research. Lots of great options with both of those links. And the last question, I think this one's my favorite. How do I get a private session with Lori? What a good question that is. So this is me, Lori Bambaco, the alphabet soup after my name. I have a master's of science in dietetics, which is the study of nutrition. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and then N is new because the academy thought, a lot of people in the public don't like that word dietitian. They find it's kind of a little restrictive. So I decided to include nutritionist as well after my name. I am a CSO, which means I'm board certified as a specialist in oncology nutrition, and I'm also licensed to practice in the state of Illinois, as well as Georgia and Florida, if anyone's asking. This is my email. Reach out to me. I would be happy to discuss anyone's need at any time. And I also included a link that brings you directly to Cancer Wellness Center's website that you could do a lot of this stuff online. So you can fill out an intake form and see if you're eligible to meet with me. If you are, you will get 8 sessions for about an hour each time, but 8 sessions, and we can do it virtually or over the phone. And it really is a pleasure to be able to work specifically with individuals to answer all these great questions. And I always include this slide. I just love it. So this is what we want our survivor, after you've been diagnosed, this is what we want you to do. If you can check off as many of these items on this list, you're going to live longer. You're going to likely reduce your risk of recurrence, a secondary malignancy, or other chronic disease like cardiovascular disease or diabetes. So a great kind of nice graphic to summarize what seems to be the healthy behaviors to pursue in survivorship. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. Welcome back. So if we stop the recording, if anyone has any questions, just to maintain confidentiality,